From 1993 to 1997, the exploits of the Superman comics were brought onto the small screen in the popular TV series Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. In this unique show where Superman takes a back seat to the office politics and exploits of Clark Kent and Lois Lane, in a will they or won't they exploration into Lois and Clark's personal relationships and workplace dynamics of the Daily Planet. There is action along the way, as Superman must often save the day from evil foes and dastardly plans. But now the tone feels more lighthearted and comical. But above all, now the Clark and Lois aspect of the Superman saga was sexy. And at the time, viewers couldn't get enough of it, and tuned in each week to see if these two headstrong reporters would indeed start a romance. So it's time to explore one of the most fascinating chapters of the Superman legacy by investigating 10 things that you, yes you, didn't know about Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, aka the Superman of the 90s, aka the Superman of the primetime Melrose Place and Baywatch era. Let's check it out. Number 10. Lois Lane's Daily Planet. Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman starts with, at the time, DC Comics president Jeanette Kahn. She had visions of a new Superman TV series. At the time, the Christopher Reeve Superman film series had fizzled out, and the last time Superman was on the small screen in live action was all the way back in the 1950s with the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series, although at that time there was a Superboy TV show. Kahn's original title of the show was Lois Lane's Daily Planet, indicating that this series was to be more Clark and Lois focused, or at least more Lois Lane and Daily Planet focused, which isn't entirely unique, as from the 50s to the 70s, the character Lois did get her own comic book series. After a few years of trying to sell the show, TV producer Deborah Joy Levine got on board to spearhead the show. Levine herself was enthusiastic for the show to be less of an action-packed superhero romp, but more of a romantic comedy. And so the show was picked up by ABC, where the show had its title changed and Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman was born. Number 9. Superboy had to end so Superman could take flight. So remember how I said that in the early days of production of Lois and Clark there was a Superboy TV show? Well, that ran from 1988 to 1992 and was produced by father-son producing team Elia and Alexander Solkind, who at the time owned the rights to the Superman brand, and had produced the Christopher Reeve Superman movies and Supergirl, where they then focused on their Superboy TV series. And after 4 seasons of that show, they were planning a series of Superboy TV movies. However, once the deal had been sealed for ABC to make Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, Warner Brothers told the Solkinds that they were taking back the rights of the Superman brand to make this new Superman show, which would be broadcast the following year in 1993. So the Superboy series had to abruptly come to a conclusion. It's also been suggested that Warner Brothers may have had concerns that people might have thought that Lois and Clark was a follow-up to the Superboy series rather than a new fresh start in a new timeline. In other words, the Superboy show had to be scrapped in order to make way for Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. The Solkinds would end up suing Warner Brothers, of which an agreement wouldn't be reached till 2005. The Superboy series was a fun kids show at the time, very much in the same vein as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but I think Warner Brothers and ABC now wanted something more adult, a show that would appeal to a wider, mature audience, so to speak. Lois and Clark may have marked the end of the Superboy show, but it would also lead to the actual death of Superman himself. Number 8. Lois and Clark killed Superman. It is said that Lois and Clark took lots of inspiration from the John Byrne Superman revamp of the comics at that time. Byrne is a comic book writer and artist who helped to reboot the Superman comics in 1986 after the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline, which wrapped up the older regime of the Superman comics. And yes, there are many elements in Lois and Clark that are similar to Byrne's reboot in the comics. Superman's appearance looks similar to how he looked in the comics. Lex Luthor was no longer an underground criminal, but now a corrupt businessman. When we meet Lois Lane, she has a romantic connection with Luthor, and Lois and Clark's relationship is more prickly at times. Also, Pa Kent is alive, and both Lois and Clark and the Byrne comics actually shows Ma Kent making Superman's costume, where the S-Shield is added to the costume as a final touch. However, due to dwindling comic sales, the writers behind the Superman comics decided to spice things up by having a story arc which would finally see Superman and Lois getting married. However, this idea put Warner Brothers into a panic, as the very theme of Lois and Clark is will they or won't they start a relationship and get married, and it was felt that if Lois and Clark got married in the comics, then audiences will no longer be interested in seeing the hijinks of Lois and Clark's relationship on the small screen. In other words, they thought the premise would be spoilt, and that audiences will now have the answers that yes, Lois and Clark will get married. So it was decided to not marry Superman and Lois till they were married in Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. So, probably out of frustration, and maybe possibly as an FU to the TV show, the writers decided to kill off Superman in the comics, which led to the Death of Superman story arc, where Superman goes up against the Beast, Doomsday, and dies, and later is resurrected. And it did actually give the comics a boost in sales. But I also wonder if that put a panic in Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman's production, as when the series debuted, Superman was actually dead in the comics. Number 7. The Search for Lois and Clark. There were apparently 12 actresses considered for the part of Lois Lane. Teri Hatcher was the number one choice, but it was felt that her hair was too long. The powers that be wanted to modernise Lois to look like a 1990s career woman, and it was felt that a modern working career woman would have shorter hair. Yeah, look, it was the 90s. So Hatcher cut her hair, and so she was cast as Lois Lane. When it came to Clark Kent and Superman, actor Gerald Christopher got the part. But there was one problem. He had already played Superboy in the as-mentioned Superboy TV series, and according to Christopher, when the casting director read his resume and saw that he played Superboy, she said to him, "You've done this already!" And so he was let go. Dean Cain auditioned, but the series developer, Deborah Joy Levine, felt that he wasn't right as he just looked too young, and told the casting director that they were looking for Superman, not Superboy. The number one choice for Clark Kent and Superman was Hercules star Kevin Sorbo. But Cain came back for more auditions, and just seemed to have that magic and won everyone over, and so he was cast. Both Hatcher and Cain have a great on-screen look. They are charismatic and they both look like supermodels. Seriously, this is Lois and Clark, the GQ photo shoot edition. They definitely looked the parts and definitely had a glamour about them. Personally, I think their on-screen chemistry is at its best when their relationship is a bit testy, when they are more competing against each other rather than the lovey-dovey stuff, but that's just me. I always thought that their conflict was brilliant, and maybe I just wasn't fully sold on them being in love. So in other words, good chemistry, but maybe just not so much a romantic chemistry. In addition to that, Lane Smith was cast as Perry White, who updated the character's saying of Great Caesar's ghost to Great Shades of Elvis. Michael Lawrence was cast as Jimmy Olsen. John Shea was cast as business tycoon but sly Lex Luthor. Be that Lex Luthor with a full head of follicles. Kay Callan and Eddie Jones were cast as Ma and Pa Kent. And Tracy Scoggins was cast as the flirtatious Cat, who, yes, I didn't know at the time, but was based on an actual character in the comics. When I was 10 years old and Lois and Clark came out, I can remember all the young boys would talk in the school playground about how they just had this huge crush on Cat. So in my hometown, at least, she may have been many people's first crush. Number 6. Giving the show a timeless look. Majority of Lois and Clark was filmed at Warner Brothers Studios at Burbank, California. It was decided to make the settings of the show have a 1940s and 1950s look, mixed in with a futuristic aesthetic, so the show will appear timeless and won't age down the track. Teri Hatcher referred to the look of the show and her costumes as being like the movie His Girl Friday. The show could also often look bright and colourful to reflect its comic book settings. It was also decided to tone down the colours on Superman's costume by giving him darker shades in order to appear more romantic. To emphasise that Clark is more of a prominent character than Superman, Clark was given the more traditional Superman haircut by giving him the fringe curl, whereas Superman had the gelled back look, usually accustomed to Clark Kent. And in order to film the flight scenes, Dean Cain had to have his hair glued down, which wasn't a nice experience, as you could imagine. And in some shots, I think you can see it. I mean, just look at all the product just encased in his hair here. Wow. It's so shiny you can probably see your reflection. The pilot episode of Lois and Clark was broadcast on the 12th of September 1993 and was directed by film and television director Robert Butler, who previously directed 6 episodes of the 1960s Batman TV series. A lot of the directors chosen for Lois and Clark had also directed other shows like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The X-Files, and later down the track, episodes of Smallville. Number 5. The Search for Good Capage. If you pay close attention, you'll see that Superman's suit in Lois and Clark The New Adventures of Superman is really fascinating, as all throughout the show it's constantly changing. In the pilot episode, the suit looked like this, and it's fine. The most notable difference is his Superman S shield is smaller. But there's just something about this costume. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't quite leap out and get your attention. After the pilot, it was decided to go more in the direction of how the suit looked in the comics, as mentioned, where the suit got this revamp. And yeah, I'm not a fan. The Superman S-shield now takes up most of his upper torso and is so large it often even tucks in under his arms. The neckline of this top comes halfway down his chest, looking more like a 90s aerobicizing top. And his cape, man! What's up with the cape? It's not tucked into his neckline, but instead we have these bulky super shoulder pads. Not the best look in my opinion. As the series went on, the neckline was thankfully made higher, and the Superman S-shield was shrunk down slightly to a reasonable size, and they adopted the tucking his cape into his neckline look. But at first though, they still had the bulky shoulder pads thing going on, until they finally fixed it up. And when the suit was in its final form, to be honest, I think it looked pretty good. It's just that it took a bit of trial and error for the show to get there. Also worth mentioning is that we also see Superman in a black Kryptonian suit, which I think is meant to be reminiscent of his black suit in the Return of Superman storyline in the comics. However, when it came to the suit, something that was a real headache to Dean Cain, and the crew for that matter, was Superman's cape. Oh wow, was this cape ever a hassle. Cain said that the cape had to be changed a couple of times in order to find the right flow and fabric. The crew kept trying to make the cape work but felt that they just couldn't get it right. While filming his flying scenes, Cain would get a bombardment of air blown at him in an attempt to get that damn cape to flow right, to which the cape would often flip over, probably looking more like a Superman spoof than actual Superman. The size, shape, and colour of the cape would often change. Cain described the process of trying to get a good flow in the cape while filming as, quote, getting good capage. Well, there you have it. A new word I haven't heard before. Capage. The ability to get good flow in your cape. Take notes, everyone. Number 4. The Lois and Clark revamp. Although the first series won acclaim and was successful to a degree, it still didn't pull in the numbers as anticipated, with ABC being disappointed by Lois and Clark being ranked at number 65 in the primetime programs. Despite this though, a second series was given the go-ahead with the hopes that it would improve. In between season 1 and 2, several changes were made. According to IMDb, series creator Deborah Joy Levine and most of her writing staff were let go as being main writers, with future Supernatural producer Robert Singer coming on board as producer in order to add more action into the show. And I think the change is clear. There was less focus on the Daily Planet office setting, and the show now felt more proactive, more like a comic book. And even more villains from the comics started to appear in the show, with Lois and Clark feeling more fantastical, while maintaining Lois and Clark's romance as the main driving force of the show. Number 3. The Disappearing Faces of Metropolis. Season 2 also saw a new Jimmy Olsen, with Justin Whalen now playing the part, as the production felt previous Olsen, Michael Lons, looked too much like Dean Cain, aka too much like Clark's little brother. Lex Luthor actor John Shea also stood down as a main character, as he felt the constant trips from New York to Los Angeles for filming were too much. So he became a character who shows up here and there. And they finally gave him the iconic bold look. And to be honest, in this form, he actually makes quite an intimidating Lex Luthor. No more of that suave charm, but now more dangerous, and I think that works. And Tracy Scoggins as Kat was now no longer in the show. Apparently, Scoggins claims that she has no idea why she was dropped, but my guess is because they now wanted a full romance between Lois and Clark. No third wheel. The show's revamp was actually successful and earned the show higher ratings, with Season 2 ending on a cliffhanger where Clark proposes to Lois. Season 3 had even higher views, and Season 3 also seemed to be the show at its peak. Season 3 once again left on a cliffhanger, with Clark returning to New Krypton. In its run, Lois and Clark would actually be nominated for a variety of Primetime Emmy Awards. So for its time, Lois and Clark was a big show. Number 2. Super Guest Stars. So throughout its 4-year run, Lois and Clark would see several celebrity guest stars who would turn up and leave their mark on the show. Some of these, but not limited to, include Sonny Bono, Bo Jackson, David Warner who played Jor-El, James Earl Jones, Bronson Pinchot, Peter Boyle, Denise Richards, Raquel Welch, Bruce Campbell, Jonathan Frakes, Tony Curtis, Shelley Long, Dean Stockwell, Morgan Fairchild, Howie Mandel, Justine Bateman, Thomas F. Wilson, Charles Fleischer, 1960s Batman Adam West, and 1960s Riddler Frank Gorshin. But to me, the most fascinating guest stars are Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen in the 1950s Adventures of Superman TV series. Here, he is playing an older version of Jimmy Olsen. And Phyllis Coates, who played Lois Lane in the first season of the as-mentioned 1950s Adventures of Superman, also appears in Lois and Clark, where she's appropriately playing Lois Lane's mother, Ellen Lane. So it's nice that the 1990s Superman TV show has ties to the 1950s Superman TV show. Number 1. Lois and Cancellation, The No More Adventures of Superman. Season 4 of Lois and Clark ended on a cliffhanger, where Lois and Clark find an infant in Clark's old crib. Who is this mysterious baby? How did it find itself to Lois and Clark? Well, sadly we'll never know, as the show was subsequently cancelled. Apparently there were plans for a 5th season, where it was to be revealed that this baby was a Kryptonian of royalty that was placed in Lois and Clark's care in order to keep the child away from assassins. So I'm guessing that because we've seen Lois and Clark get married, Season 5 would have seen them as young parents, which is a new direction, and I can see the potential of that storyline. But, once again, it didn't go anywhere. I've heard 2 theories as to why the show was cancelled. One, a drop in viewership, which was put down to the show being placed in different time slots, and the other being Terry Hatcher was pregnant and was now unable to film a 5th season. Whatever the cause, on June 14th, 1997, the last episode of Lois and Clark was broadcast, and then entered the history pages of the Superman saga, as another timeline that had now run its course. So what are my thoughts on Lois and Clark? Well, when Lois and Clark first came out, being a massive Superman fan, it actually took me a while to get into it. I didn't know how to react to this more domestic, romantic, office comedy approach to Superman. When I was a kid, I wanted action. I wanted to see Superman kicking ass. I didn't want the main focus being on the Daily Planet office. I thought that the Daily Planet scene should be a byproduct of the action and spectacle and not the other way round. But I did really get on board with the show when it did later become more proactive and exciting. And look, they tried something different. They tried to update the Superman legend into the 90s and give it a modern workplace setting, focusing on Lois and Clark's daily interactions as reporters. So at least this does stand out from other Superman media and does its own thing. Although something that I think was a mistake was having Lois and Clark get married. To me, that took away the show's flair. The The whole build-up of the show was the romantic tension between Lois and Clark. That was the main focus. And the show was built on this premise of will they or won't they actually get married. And I think that once they were married, the main aspect of the show is gone. And to me, it does kind of feel like they didn't know where to go from there. That, and it just felt weird seeing Clark and Lois in bed together. I don't know why, but to me it just did. I think they should have saved the wedding for the final episode. That would have been the perfect way to send off the series. Incidentally, Clark and Lois's wedding in Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman coincided with their wedding in the comic, so that must have been a very magical time if you're a Superman fan. But regardless, during the 90s, Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman was our Superman fix and how we got to enjoy the character on screen. It could often be fun and has likeable characters that you care for, of which were performed well by the actors. But above all, the show had heart, and it was actually very charming. So for 4 years, we got to enjoy this iteration of Superman, and just like that, up and away, the show took off and was no more. But it will always live on in the lore of Superman, and in the hearts of those who loved this show. Yeah, I think the show is fine. It's another chapter in the history of Superman, and so for that, I'll always love it. And I do think that both Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher have a likeable presence on screen, along with great charisma. Anyway, I'm Minty, and I hope you all get some good capage. See ya!